We all want our hard work to pay off. One of the easiest ways to have your hard work of planning and teaching not pay off is to accidentally overload your students' brains, specifically their working memory. In this video, I'm going to help you avoid that with 3 specific ways to work with your students' brains instead of against them. This is Ekwa. Let's say Ekwa is a student of yours. Have you ever thought about just how much Ekwa's brain needs to process to succeed in your class? Maybe even just to participate in your class? No matter what subject you teach, learning practically always involves holding multiple things in mind at the same time. Whether it's different parts of a formula, new information and prior knowledge, the form and the meaning of a word or sentence, a text you're reading and your thoughts on the issues it raises. And that's just the things that are actually part of the content or skills we're trying to learn. There are also things like the instructions for a task or how a class activity works. All these things and more need to be held in and processed by Ekwa's working memory if she's going to have a chance of succeeding in your class. Now here's the problem. The human working memory, and Ekwa's too, is notoriously limited. It just doesn't have that much space or power to process all the things. If you're wondering how much space or how many things, you'll usually hear between 5 and 9, but that's kind of vague, right? And it's hard to tell what even is one piece of information versus 2 separate pieces of information that would take up 2 separate slots in working memory. Before I go on, let me clarify just in case what working memory even is. It's a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't necessarily involve what most people would think of as remembering things. You can think of it basically as how many items your brain can deal with before it starts dropping items or even shutting down the learning process. A decent metaphor is how many tabs you can have open in your brain's browser at the same time without it crashing. Brain's browser, brain's browser, brain's browser, brain's browser, brain's browser, brain's browser. So when students' working memories are overloaded, we're actually trying to fight against their brains. Or looking at it another way, trying to get students to fight against their own brains. So what can we do? Well, basically we want to do what's called reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load is just the current contents of a working memory, whatever tabs are currently open. Now in a way, the solution's straightforward, just have less going on. Fewer moving parts, fewer bells and whistles, less new stuff at a time, simpler instructions. But I want to give you more specific and reliable solutions, as well as a twist on this whole concept. So solution number 1 is to avoid what's called the split attention effect. The split attention effect happens when there are too many sources of information, and especially when there are multiple sources of the same kinds of information, such as visual information. And the most common examples you see are visual. Let's say you have a diagram or a picture and also written information about that diagram or picture, but instead of written as labels right in the diagram or the relevant parts of the picture, you have a separate area on the page or even a whole other page or source that says number 1 in the picture is this, number 2 in the picture is this, or angle A in the diagram is this many degrees. The diagram is one piece and the stuff written somewhere else is another piece of information. The brain's going to treat that as 2 separate things in working memory, whereas if you include the labels right on the diagram or on the picture, the brain can treat that as one source of visual information. Another example, maybe for a different subject area, is if you have a text and there are words or other things within that text that you want to expand on or define. A lot of times you might have glosses at the bottom of a page or footnotes or things like that, but that puts the related info far apart, as opposed to if you have a definition or an explanation right there in the text. Again, the brain can treat that as one visual source of information. By the way, although visual split attention is the most commonly discussed kind, you can also have auditory split attention. And that's actually why you don't hear any background music in the video right now. Even though a lot of videos will have voiceover and some kind of music, if the idea is really to pay attention to the words and to learn something from them, there's a lot of evidence that background music, even if it's pleasing, the brain might latch onto as its own piece of information, and that could get in the way of learning. I want to be 100% clear, because I've now used the words visual and auditory, that this has nothing to do with supposed learning styles. It's simply about how the brain processes multiple pieces of information. That's the perfect segue to solution number 2, which is to take advantage of the modality effect. The modality effect is based on the fact that the split attention we talked about a moment ago doesn't seem to apply as much when you have simultaneous visual and auditory information that are related in a helpful way. So you actually can support students' brains and learning by having some carefully chosen visual information that's complemented by auditory information. For example, if you have a picture or a diagram and you orally comment on that. So think carefully when you're planning and teaching what information really works well as a visual on a slide or on a page, and what information maybe makes sense for you to say aloud. There's one noteworthy exception to the modality principle, which is that if the language you're saying aloud, or the language that's heard in whatever the resource is a language in which the learner is not yet very proficient, that student may have trouble integrating the visual information and the oral information. On that note, by the way, if you're trying to take advantage of the modality effect, you don't want the visual and the auditory information to be identical, like if you're just reading the exact words that students can see in front of them. presenters just reading off the slides, anybody? Again, an exception can be if you're actually teaching a language and you want students to experience what those written words sound like. Last but not least, solution number 3 is reduce the problem space. The problem space is simply the distance between wherever a given learner is right now and the thing they're trying to learn. This is the perfect place to remind us that the absolute ease or difficulty of that thing is completely irrelevant. All that matters is the actual specific learner and the distance between them and where they want to be. All that matters is Ekwa and the distance between her and the thing she's trying to learn. If that problem space is too big, then trying to overcome that is going to involve overloading Ekwa's working memory with the result that it either drops things or crashes. Now you might say, what decent teacher would do that? We all know not to throw too much at students or have unrealistic expectations of learners, but you might actually find that if you start examining problem spaces with the principles of working memory and cognitive overload in mind, that those spaces are actually bigger than you thought. So we want to plan with the actual specific learners in our classes in mind and with smaller problem spaces that combine to cover the big ones. I said there'd be a twist, and here it is. Working memory is pretty limited in the first place, but it's limited even more by stress. The actual capacity, those 5 to 9 things, is reduced by stress. So for Ekwa, who on a good day might have 8 slots available in her working memory, stress from life in general, stress from other classes, maybe even stress from your class, can reduce that capacity of 8 down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, maybe even 0. When that happens, and as a result, Ekwa isn't able to learn in the ways that you or she would want, or maybe not even participate, that's not Ekwa not paying attention, that's not Ekwa not trying hard enough, that's not Ekwa not being smart enough, that's just her brain working the way brains work. Now here's a twist on the twist. Not only is Ekwa's working memory reduced by stress, but also if any of those stressors are on Ekwa's mind, they might be using up those last couple remaining slots. Now, we may not be able to do much about the stressors in students' lives. A lot of those things are out of our control, but we do have some control over what happens in our class. And the good news is that because of how strong the effect of stress on working memory is, one of the most efficient ways we can help students' working memories and their brains and their learning is simply to do what we can to make sure our class is a calm and pleasant place. You can do that directly with anything from a calming exercise to a joke, but also just with your demeanor, with how you structure a class, with how you approach assessment, and more. If you want a bunch more examples, you can check out this video on Happifying Your Class next. If you want me to make more videos like this one and more people to see them, go ahead and the like button. And do please share this video or this channel with anyone you think might be helped by it. I'm Justin from TeachHuman. I'll see you next time.